My name is Chloe, and I need to tell someone what happened. I need to get it out, because keeping it inside feels like a poison, slowly working its way through me. Some nights I wake up and I can still smell the old wood, and the sea salt, and I can hear the scratching. God, the scratching! It all started last October. The world had gone sideways for me. There was an accident, rain-slicked roads, the screech of tires, a flash of blinding light. When I woke up in the hospital, my boyfriend, Mark, was gone. The silence he left behind was deafening, a constant, high-pitched ringing in my soul. I was drowning in it, in the guilt and the grief. I had to get away. From our apartment, from the pitying looks of our friends, from the ghost of his laughter that I still heard in every corner. So I did what anyone does when they're desperate. I went online, I looked for jobs, the more remote, the better. And that's when I found it. The advertisement was discreet, posted by a private agency. Live-in caregiver sought for elderly woman, secluded coastal property, generous compensation. Discretion required. Secluded, generous compensation. It was perfect, a place where the silence of the sea could drown out the silence in my head. A week later, a man named Mr. Abernathy, a thin man with a perpetually worried expression, drove me down a long, winding road flanked by skeletal, windswept trees. At the end of it, perched on a cliff overlooking a churning gray ocean, was the house. It wasn't just a house, it was a relic. A 3-story Victorian monstrosity of dark wood and stained glass, with a single turret that looked like a crooked finger pointing at the sky. It looked like it had been pulled from a nightmare. As we got out of the car, a blast of cold, salty air hit me so hard it stole my breath. "It has character, doesn't it?" Mr. Abernathy said, avoiding my eyes. "It's big," I managed. The owner, Mrs. Elara Vance, is nonverbal. A stroke years ago left her mostly catatonic. Your duties are simple. You'll feed her, bathe her, read to her. She's no trouble at all. The last girl, Sarah, had to leave suddenly, a family emergency back in the city. He said it all in a rush, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. He led me inside. The interior was a cavern of shadows, and dust motes dancing in the weak afternoon light. The air was thick with the smell of old paper, beeswax, and something else. Something faintly medicinal and unpleasant. Every surface was covered in dark, heavy furniture. A grandfather clock in the hall stood silent, its hands frozen at 3:15. And then I saw her. She was sitting in a high-backed armchair by a massive, sea-facing window, a plaid blanket draped over her lap. Elara Vance. She was ancient, a fragile collection of bones and paper-thin skin. Her hair was a wispy cloud of white, and her hands were gnarled with arthritis, resting limply on the armrests. But it was her eyes that held me. They were a milky, clouded blue, the color of a winter sky. Cataracts, I assumed. Yet, as I stood there, I felt a strange, prickling sensation on my skin. The distinct, unnerving feeling of being seen. Of being studied. Mr. Abernathy made a hasty introduction, his voice echoing in the oppressive quiet. Elara gave no sign of having heard him. He showed me to my room on the 2nd floor, a sparse, clean room that felt strangely sterile compared to the rest of the house. And then he was practically jogging to the door. "The pantry is fully stocked. A delivery comes every Tuesday. Just leave the list on the porch. Don't hesitate to call if... well, just don't." He finished lamely, and then he was gone, his car crunching on the gravel drive until it faded into nothing. And then I was alone. Alone with the silent house and the silent woman staring out at the silent sea. The first week passed in a haze of monotonous routine. Mornings were for bathing and dressing Elara, a difficult task as her limbs were stiff and uncooperative. Afternoons, I'd read to her. Dickens, Austen, Bronte. I'd sit in a chair opposite her, my voice filling the cavernous room, and she would just sit, unblinking, unmoving. It was like reading to a statue, but at night, the house came alive. The silence I had craved became my enemy. It was a heavy, breathing silence that amplified every tiny sound. The groan of the house settling, the lonely whistle of the wind through the eaves. and other things. It started with the scratching. The first time I heard it, I had just drifted, off to sleep. It was a faint, dry sound, scritch, scritch, scratch. It sounded like it was coming from inside the walls of my bedroom. I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. I told myself it was rats. An old house like this, it had to be rats. But the sound was rhythmic, almost deliberate. It would last for maybe a minute, then stop, leaving a silence that was somehow worse than the noise itself. Then came the humming. A few nights later, I was woken again, this time by a melody. It was a lullaby, but it was all wrong. The tune was disjointed, off-key, like a music box that was slowly breaking down. It was faint, seeming to come from the hallway right outside my door. I held my breath, listening. It was a woman's hum, thin and reedy. It drifted down the hall, before fading away. I spent the rest of the night with my back pressed against the headboard, staring at the door, waiting for the handle to turn. During the day, I tried to rationalize it. The house was playing tricks on me. My grief was making me paranoid, but the unease was a knot in my stomach that wouldn't loosen. I started watching Elara more closely. I'd be cleaning the room, and I'd catch a flicker of movement in the periphery. I'd turn, and her head would be at a slightly different angle, her milky eyes aimed directly at me. It was impossible. She couldn't move her head on her own. And yet, I knew what I saw. I was her caregiver, but I was beginning to feel like I was the one being watched. My breaking point came at the start of the 3rd week. I was changing Elara's bed sheets, pulling the heavy mattress away from the wall, when my hand brushed against a loose floorboard. Curiosity got the better of me. I pried it up. Underneath, nestled in the dark, dusty space, was a single, ornate brass key. It was old and heavy, and I knew with a sudden, chilling certainty that it wasn't for any door I had seen. Except one. Mr. Abernathy had pointed out a door at the far end of the attic during my initial tour. "Just old storage," he'd said. "Key's been lost for ages." That night, after I had put Elara to bed, or rather, positioned her in her bed for the night, and after the house had settled into its usual waiting silence, I took the key and a flashlight and crept up the narrow stairs to the attic. The air grew colder with each step. The door was just as he'd described, plain and wooden, with a keyhole dark and forbidding. My hand was shaking, but I forced the key into the lock. It turned with a loud, grating click that seemed to shatter the silence of the entire house. Pushed the door open, and a smell washed over me. The sharp, clean scent of sawdust and varnish, mixed with the musty odor of old fabric. I shone my flashlight into the darkness, and my blood ran cold. The room wasn't for storage. It was a workshop, and it was filled with dolls. Dozens of them. They were hanging from the rafters in neat, orderly rows, suspended by strings. They weren't children's toys. They were life-sized marionettes, each one carved from wood with an artist's painstaking detail. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothes, a maid's uniform here, a gardener's overalls there, a simple house dress. Their painted eyes, glinting in the beam of my flashlight, seemed to follow me as I stepped into the room. It was a silent, watchful congregation. In the center of the workshop was a large workbench, and on it, lying on its back, was a single unfinished doll. It was the size of a woman, my size. Its wooden limbs were fully articulated, the joints exquisite, but its face was a smooth, featureless oval of pale, sanded wood. It had no eyes, no nose, no mouth. It was waiting. My light fell on a large, leather-bound trunk in the corner of the room. With trembling fingers, I lifted the heavy lid. It was filled with old photographs and albums. The first photo I pulled out was a sepia-toned image from what looked like the 1920s, showing a stern-faced man in a chauffeur's uniform standing next to an old car. I looked up at the hanging puppets. My eyes scanned the rows until I found him. The same flat cap, the same stern jawline, the same resentful eyes, all perfectly captured in painted wood. I dug through the trunk, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Photo after photo, I matched them. A smiling cook from the 1950s, a young maid from the 70s, a groundskeeper from the 90s. They were all here, every last one. A collection of the people who had lived and worked in this house, immortalized as life-sized puppets. Near the bottom of the trunk, I found a small, modern photo album. The pictures were recent. They were of a smiling young woman with bright, hopeful eyes. Sarah, the caregiver who had left because of a family emergency. I flipped through pictures of her in the house, in the garden, by the sea. The last photo was of her standing by Elara's chair, her arm resting on the old woman's shoulder. My flashlight beam shook as I aimed it back at the hanging dolls, and I found her, tucked in the back row, almost hidden in shadow. It was Sarah. Her hair, her clothes, even a small mole above her lip were all perfectly replicated, but the expression carved into her face wasn't smiling, it was a mask of pure, abject terror. Her wooden mouth was open in a silent, unending scream. She never left. The sound of the floorboards creaking downstairs shot through me like a bolt of lightning. I wasn't alone. I scrambled out of the attic, not bothering to lock the door, and sprinted back to my room, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. The scratching started, but this time it wasn't just in my walls. It was all around me, from the floor below, from the ceiling above. A frantic, desperate sound, like 100 trapped things trying to claw their way out. I locked my door, shoved a chair under the handle, and fell onto my bed, pulling the covers over my head like a child. I knew then that sleep was a luxury I could no longer afford. The house was not empty, it was full. And I was the newest addition to the collection. The next day, I had to pretend. I had to go through the motions. I went to Elara's room, my limbs stiff with terror. She was in her chair by the window, exactly as I had left her. But something was different. A small, almost imperceptible smirk seemed to play on her thin lips. Her milky eyes, I was now certain, were not blind. They saw everything. I knew I had to find proof, something to understand what was happening. My mind went back to the workshop. Amid the wood shavings and carving tools on the workbench, I had seen a small stack of books. Journals. I had to go back. That afternoon, while Elara was in her post-lunch stupor, I slipped away again, back to the attic. This time, the room felt different. It felt expectant. The dolls seemed to watch me with a new malevolence. I ignored them, going straight to the workbench and grabbing the journals. They were bound in cracked leather, the pages filled with a spidery, elegant script. They were Elara's. I took them back to my room and locked the door. I started with the earliest one, dated nearly 70 years ago. The entries began innocently enough. Elara was a young woman, a gifted artist. She wrote of her passion for puppetry, her desire to create not just toys, but perfect, lifelike vessels. She called her marionettes her children. But as the years passed, the writing became more obsessive. She grew frustrated with the limitations of wood and paint. "They look alive, but they are not," she wrote. "They lack the spark, the essence." She began to delve into darker subjects, obscure folklore, ancient texts on transference and vessel creation. Her handwriting grew more erratic. She wrote about the flawed prison of flesh and the purity of a wooden form. And then I found it. The entry that explained everything. "The ritual is complete," it read. "The lullaby attunes the spirit, weakening its tether to the mortal coil. A period of fear and isolation makes the soul pliable, desperate for any escape. Then, at the final moment, the essence can be collected, transferred into its new perfect home. My first true child is born. Mr. Henderson, the chauffeur, has found his purpose at last. His old body is a husk, but I find I can still command it. A useful, silent servant." I dropped the journal as if it were on fire. My vision swam. It wasn't a stroke. Elara wasn't catatonic. She was the puppeteer, and everyone in this house, living and dead, was her marionette. The body in the chair was just an empty shell she inhabited, a puppet of flesh and bone. The scratching I heard every night, it was Sarah, and the chauffeur, and the cook. Their souls were trapped inside those wooden bodies, hanging in the attic. And at night, Elara would make them move. They weren't trying to get in. They were trying to warn me, the unfinished doll on the workbench, the one with the blank, waiting face. It was for me. A floorboard creaked in the hallway outside. My room, my blood turned to ice. Then the humming started, not faint and distant this time, but loud and clear, right outside my door. The broken, off-key lullaby. I scrambled back, away from the door, my eyes wide with terror. The doorknob began to jiggle, slowly at first, then more violently. The chair I had wedged underneath it scraped against the floor, groaning under the pressure. I had to get out. I ran to the window. It overlooked a narrow section of the roof, about a 15-foot drop to the soggy garden below. It was my only chance. I threw the window open, the cold sea air blasting my face, and clambered out onto the slippery shingles. My feet scrabbled for purchase. Behind me, I heard the wood of my bedroom door splinter and crack. I didn't look back. I half slid, half crawled across the roof to a thick branch of an ancient gnarled oak tree that grew against the house. The wind whipped at me, trying to tear me from my perch. I took a deep breath and leaped. My fingers caught the branch. For a heart-stopping second, I dangled there, my body swinging wildly. Then I found my footing and scrambled down the trunk, scraping my hands and knees, not caring about the pain. I hit the ground running. I ran blindly away from the house, through the twisted trees and overgrown garden. I could hear the front door of the house bang open behind me. I didn't dare turn around, but I felt it. A presence. The entire house, a malevolent entity, was watching me go. I could feel the hatred of its silent collector pouring out into the night. I reached the road and I just kept running, not stopping until the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon and the headlights of a passing truck illuminated my tear-streaked face. It's been 6 months since I escaped. I live in a new city, in a small, modern apartment on the 20th floor. There are no old floorboards, no dark attics, no whistling wind. There is only the constant, anonymous noise of the city. I tell myself I'm safe, but some nights I wake up in a cold sweat, and in the dead silence of my apartment, I can almost hear it. A faint, dry sound. Scritch, scritch, scratch. It sounds like it's coming from inside the walls. And I remember the unfinished doll with its blank, waiting face. And I have to wonder, did I get away completely? Or did the silent collector get a small piece of me after all? A piece that is still there, in that house by the sea, waiting to be completed.